The blizzard howled like a living thing as the pregnant woman collapsed into the snow, her breath freezing in midair, her fingers locked around her unborn child. Behind her, the cabin door slammed shut, and the man she loved, the man who had promised her forever, turned his back without a word. Just as the darkness closed in, a shadow on horseback emerged from the storm, its face hidden, its purpose unknown. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Hannah Dawson once believed that love was stronger than death. It was the kind of faith born not from experience, but from the embroidered sermons her mother whispered while braiding her hair at the hearth. To love, her mother said, was to endure. To endure, her mother promised, was to conquer. That belief clung to Hannah even as Daniel Blake rode into her life with war-sunk eyes and a smile as thin and brittle as the first ice of winter. In the churchyard, where the dying sun dipped the headstones into blood-colored shadow, he had asked for her hand. And she, mistaking his brokenness for depth, said yes. But love cannot mend a man who does not wish to be mended. The first months after their wedding were a cruel education. Daniel awoke in the night screaming the names of men long dead. He flinched at the crackle of a fire, cursed invisible foes across the room. His tenderness withered into suspicion. His laughter hollowed into grim mutterings Hannah could not decipher. Still, she held fast. She learned to patch windows broken in his rages, to hide the bruises where no neighbor would see. She told herself that patience was a weapon, too. When she told Daniel she was with child, she thought he might weep with gratitude, might fall to his knees and find at last some anchor to life. Instead, he looked at her with something like fear, an animal fear, wild and raw. His lips tightened into a hard line. That night, he did not come to bed. She heard him pacing the frozen yard until dawn, boots crunching over frost-bitten earth. Winter arrived hard, slicing through Wyoming with blades of ice. Snow rose against the cabin walls like white, creeping tombstones. Food dwindled, firewood ran low, and Daniel, each day, grew quieter, darker, like a man walking willingly into his own grave. The night he turned on her was colder than any before. The wind howled so fiercely it rattled the loose shutters and forced smoke down the chimney until the room stank of ashes. Hannah was stitching a baby's quilt by the hearth, each thread a prayer against the gnawing emptiness of the world outside, when the door slammed open with a crack like gunfire. Daniel stood there, framed in the doorway, snow swirling around him. His coat hung open, his hair a wild mess. His eyes, God help her, held nothing human anymore. He crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand closed around her wrist, fingers like iron. The needle pricked her palm as he yanked her upward. "You cursed me," he said, voice low and broken. "You and that thing you carry. You've doomed us." Hannah gasped, tried to pull free, but Daniel was beyond reason. He dragged her across the room, threw open the door, and shoved her into the raging dark. The cold hit her like a fist, stealing her breath. Her boots sank into the snow up to her calves. Wind clawed at her hair, tore at her shawl. She stumbled, arms crossed protectively over her stomach. Behind her, Daniel loomed in the doorway a moment longer, a shadow against the flickering firelight. Then he slammed the door shut. The latch clattered into place with a finality that echoed inside her chest like a death knell. She heard him mutter through the crack of the wood, "Better off with the spirits." Hannah stood there, stunned, as the storm swallowed every sound but the roar of the wind. The sky above was a black, seething ocean. The ground below was a field of white graves. There was no path, no mercy, no hope. And deep inside her womb, the baby stirred, as if sensing the battle their mother was about to lose. The cold wasn't just air anymore. It was a living thing. It clawed into Hannah Dawson's body with fingers made of frost, peeling back her strength inch by inch. Her boots, already soaked, squelched against the freezing slush with every staggered step. Snow forced itself into her worn shoes, into the seams of her patched dress, melting against her skin only to freeze again, forming tiny needles of ice that stabbed at her with every movement. The darkness above her was not the darkness of night. It was a vast, uncaring void, stretching beyond the edge of the world. The sky no longer held stars, only the swirling, churning black, like the mouth of something that had already begun swallowing her. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one sharp enough to slice her lungs. The muscles in her thighs and lower back spasmed under the weight of her pregnancy. Her belly, once a source of secret hope and pride, now dragged her downward like an anchor. Inside, the child moved weakly, a soft, uneven shifting, as if the little soul was trying to burrow deeper, away from the grasping fingers of death. She didn't know how long she had been walking. Time had dissolved into the blizzard, leaving only the pulse of survival hammering in her ears. One more step, then another, then another. The snow reached her hips now, a slow-motion burial. Her fingers had gone beyond pain, beyond even numbness. They felt like chunks of wood, stiff and alien. She tried to flex them, to hold them against her stomach, but they barely responded. Why had she trusted Daniel? Why had she clung to the fantasy that love alone could tame a man broken into jagged, bloody pieces? Her mind, clouded by exhaustion and cold, began to drift, replaying old scenes against the darkness. Daniel's rough hands on her waist the day they wed, his cracked voice singing to her on their first night in the cabin, the way his eyes, those haunted storm-gray eyes, used to search hers as if looking for some lost thing. Had that ever been real? Or had she fallen in love with a ghost from the start? Her legs gave out. She fell hard, the snow swallowing her instantly. The impact forced a whimper from her lips, a pathetic, broken sound. She curled instinctively, wrapping her arms around her stomach, shielding the life inside her even as her own slipped away. The world tilted. Distantly, as if underwater, she thought she heard something. Hooves crunching over ice. A low rhythmic thud, growing louder, closer. She forced her head up. Her vision blurred. Through the dancing curtains of snow she saw it. A shape, dark and solid against the blinding white. A rider. A horse. Moving with terrible ghost-like grace across the storm. Her heart surged painfully in her chest. Was it Daniel coming back to finish what he started? Was it death itself, riding out to collect her? She opened her mouth to scream, but only a faint croak emerged, lost to the howling wind. Her arms trembled, her body slumped lower. She pressed her cracked lips to the curve of her belly, whispering against the fabric. "Forgive me, my little one." Then, with the last dregs of strength, she breathed a single word, not a name, not a plea, just a whisper shaped like hope. "Please." And the shadow drew closer, silent and inexorable, as the blizzard howled its ancient hunger into the night. At first, Eli Tallbear thought the wind was playing tricks on him. Out on the high plains, the storm spoke with many voices, whistling through the dry bones of trees, keening across the broken earth, crying in the ears of men who had been alone too long. But this sound was different, softer, human, a thread of life unraveling in the storm. He tugged gently on the reins of his dun-colored pony, bringing the animal to a halt atop a small rise. From this vantage, he scanned the sea of white, eyes trained by years of hunting elk and fox to notice what others missed. There, a blotch against the swirling snow. Movement, weak and uneven. Not a deer, not a wolf. He urged the pony forward, keeping low in the saddle, instinctively cautious. Trouble came easy in these lands, especially for a man like him. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a woman, a white woman, by the pale thread of her hair and the homespun dress soaked and frozen stiff to her frail form. She lay crumpled in the snow like a broken bird, her arms wrapped around a bulge at her center. Pregnant. Eli reined in sharply, his breath misting in front of him. His heart thudded heavily against his ribs, a slow, grinding beat. To interfere was madness. A lone white woman, half dead in the snow, was a snare if there ever was one. If settlers found her with him, even if he saved her, there would be no questions. Only bullets. For a long moment, he sat frozen, the storm whipping his long braids against the fur-lined collar of his coat. His mind raced, weighing choices. Ride away, pretend he hadn't seen her, live another day, or stay, and risk death not just for himself, but for his people who had suffered enough under the white man's laws and vengeance. He tightened his gloved hands on the reins, jaw clenched so hard it ached. Then Hannah moved. A twitch, small, pitiful, of her frost-bitten fingers against her belly, protecting the unborn life even as her own ebbed away. Something inside Eli cracked, a splinter he thought had long since been driven too deep to feel. Last winter, his wife, Morning Rain, had died with their infant son swaddled against her breast, both taken by fever, their bodies still warm when he found them. He had buried them beneath a weeping cedar, his own heart going into the ground with them. He had sworn never to open that wound again. But wounds have a way of bleeding whether a man wills it or not. He slid off the pony in one fluid motion, boots sinking into the snow with a soft crunch. Without hesitation now, he pulled the heavy buffalo robe from his saddle and knelt beside the woman. Her skin was like marble beneath his rough fingers, so cold, so fragile he feared she might shatter if he touched her too harshly. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, blue with cold. Her lips moved, shaping a word he could not hear. Gently, he wrapped the robe around her, gathering her slight weight against his chest. The snow had frozen the hem of her dress stiff. He broke the ice with careful hands, shielding her belly first, murmuring old words of protection in Cheyenne under his breath. His pony shifted nervously nearby, sensing the urgency. Eli tightened his hold on the woman, on the life within her, and rose, staggering slightly under her weight. He did not look back. There was no choice. Not truly. Not when you knew what it meant to find your family frozen and silent in the snow. Not when you still heard their voices in every storm. He lifted her onto the pony before him, cradling her close. Her head lolled against his chest, and for the briefest moment, a sigh escaped her cracked lips, as if, even half dead, she knew she was no longer alone. Eli Tallbear set his face into the wind and rode toward life, toward danger, toward a promise he had thought he could no longer keep. Eli pressed the woman's frozen body tighter against his own as the pony galloped through the storm, the buffalo robe flaring behind them like a dark, desperate wing. Her slight weight sagged against his chest, limp and frighteningly still. His own hands, though thick with calluses and hardened by years of work, trembled slightly as he clutched her closer, shielding her from the wind's knives. The blizzard fought him every step of the way. Snow blinded his eyes, tore at his furs, numbed his legs until it felt like he rode with stone limbs. But Eli bent low over the mare's neck, muttering encouragement in Cheyenne, urging the pony forward, faster, faster. Every moment counted. Every gust of wind stole a breath from the fragile life he carried. By the time the village fires came into view, small, flickering stars in the storm's vast maw, Eli could barely feel his own body. Only the thready beat of the woman's heart, faint against his chest, kept him tethered to movement, to purpose. The elders met him at the edge of the settlement, grim-faced, wary. Their warnings were immediate, sharp as flint. She is white. Her kind will come with guns if she dies here. They will not ask questions. They will not care why you helped. Eli said nothing. He knew they were right. He felt their fear crawling through the night like another predator, waiting to pounce. But as he dismounted and gathered the woman into his arms, he looked once more at her frozen hands cradling her belly, and the decision he had made out in the storm hardened into steel. He carried her to his lodge, shouldering aside fear and tradition alike. Inside, he set to work with the precision of a man who had too often fought death and lost. He built a fire high and fierce, the smoke curling against the roof. He laid her by the flames, stripped away the sodden layers of clothing from her shivering form, wrapping her in clean pelts. Her skin was gray, almost translucent. Her breath barely lifted her chest. He crushed herbs between his palms, sage, sweetgrass, willow bark, and brewed them into a bitter broth that he spooned between her cracked lips, drop by painful drop. When she could not swallow, he wet her mouth with cloth soaked in boiled water, whispering to her in the old tongue, "Stay, fight. You are not alone." The fever came the second night, cruel and merciless. Hannah thrashed weakly against the bedding, muttering broken sounds. Her body burned with a heat that terrified him more than the cold had. Sweat poured from her brow, soaking the hides. Her hands clawed blindly at the air, seeking something, someone, long vanished. Eli never left her side. He dozed sitting up, waking at the slightest change in her breathing. He sang old Cheyenne songs low under his breath, songs of protection, of homecoming, of spirits guiding the lost back to life. Outside, the village watched in wary silence. Inside, Eli fought against death with everything he had left: fire, water, ancient words, and the stubborn, aching refusal to lose another life to the cold. Each day was a battle, each night a prayer. And though she hovered at the threshold of the spirit world, he clung to her with the quiet ferocity of a man who had already buried too many dreams beneath frozen earth, and would not, could not, bury one more. The first thing Hannah felt was heat, suffocating, foreign, clinging to her skin like a heavy, wet shroud. Her throat burned raw with thirst, and her body throbbed with a pain so deep it felt like it had been carved into her bones. Panic struck before thought could. Her eyes snapped open, and she recoiled. The world swam before her, a blur of flickering firelight and looming shadows. The walls were strange, stitched hides stretched tight across bent saplings. The air was thick with the sharp tang of smoke and crushed herbs. The ground beneath her shifted slightly, pelts and earth, not the creaking boards of her home. She was nowhere she knew, nowhere safe. Then she saw him, the man. He sat a few paces away, cross-legged by the fire, his profile cut in bronze and shadow, dark hair braided with beads, rough deerskin clothes. A long scar traced the line of his jaw, not ugly but undeniable, a mark of survival, or perhaps violence. Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs. She scrabbled weakly at the bedding, trying to push herself upright, but her muscles gave out with a pathetic tremor. The man turned at the sound, his movements slow, deliberate, careful as approaching a wounded animal. His eyes, deep and black as river stones, met hers, not with triumph, not with threat, but with something closer to mourning. Still, fear gripped her throat. Had Daniel sent someone to finish what he started? Had she been saved only to be delivered into a worse fate? The man spoke, softly, a ripple of foreign syllables, and raised his hands palm out, empty, in a gesture of peace. Then, in halting English, thick with an unfamiliar accent, he said, "You. Safe. No hurt." He tapped his chest, then pointed gently to her. "Eli. You." His voice was low, steady, a stone at the center of a storm. No anger, no cruelty, only patience. Tears welled in Hannah's cracked eyes, but she blinked them back, clinging to what little pride remained. She pressed her arms instinctively over her swollen belly and felt, to her stunned relief, a tiny, sluggish kick against her palm. Alive. Her child was alive. Sobs tore from her then, hoarse and broken. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers, trying to stifle the noise, but it poured out of her, raw and unstoppable. Through her gasps, the words tumbled free. He left me, my husband. He dragged me into the snow, left me there to die. Eli's face changed. The stillness in him cracked like ice underfoot. His eyes, once steady pools of calm, darkened with something colder, harder, a barely contained fury. His hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists. Yet when he spoke, it was not with anger. His voice was a rough whisper, a thread pulled from some deeper place. No man leaves woman like this. He shook his head once, a slow, final gesture. It wasn't just judgment. It was understanding. Eli Tallbear knew cruelty. He had seen it in the burning villages, in the broken treaties, in the graves dug hastily before winter's first frost. But this, abandoning a woman heavy with life, casting her into the teeth of the storm, this was a crime the earth itself would not forgive. And so he sat there, silent but unwavering, a guardian between her and the darkness she had fled, until Hannah, too exhausted to fear anymore, let her head sag back against the bedding and wept until sleep claimed her once again. The sky hung low and heavy, a slab of dull iron pressing down on the earth. A cold wind whipped across the plains, rattling the bare branches like bones knocking in a shallow grave. Eli Tallbear adjusted the buffalo robe around Hannah's shoulders and swung into the saddle behind her, his presence steady, silent. She leaned forward slightly, her jaw set, her hands trembling only where he could not see. The village had begged her not to go. Even Eli, grim and patient, had tried to dissuade her. Let ghosts stay buried, the elders said. Let the dead bury the dead. But Hannah could not. Not while Daniel's betrayal festered inside her like a wound left to rot. Not while her soul carried the weight of what he had done. She needed him to see her standing, alive, unbroken. The journey back to the cabin was a slow ascent into old fear. Every twist of the trail was a memory. Daniel chopping wood with a boyish grin. Daniel staring into the fire, silent for hours. Daniel's voice, rough with drink, growing sharper as the nights grew colder. By the time they reached the clearing, Hannah's heart beat so loudly she thought it might shake her apart. The cabin stood slumped and sagging under the weight of winter. The shutters hung crooked. The porch sagged like a drunkard's shoulders. Smoke limped from the chimney in thin, reluctant threads. And there he was, Daniel Blake. He stumbled from the porch, a bottle dangling from one slack hand. His coat was torn, boots unlaced, eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He muttered to himself, a string of words that made no sense. A wreck of a man. When he spotted them, he stopped mid-step. His mouth fell open. For a long heartbeat, he just stared, disbelief locking him in place. Hannah, pale but upright, wrapped in furs like some vengeful spirit, and beside her, Eli Tallbear, a towering figure of silence and iron, his face unreadable. Recognition dawned in Daniel's ruined eyes, and with it, rage. "You!" He slurred, the word cracking from his throat like a whip. He hurled the bottle, glass shattering harmlessly against the frozen earth. "You were dead. You should be dead." He lunged at them, a staggering, clumsy bull's charge. His hands, once so familiar, now gnarled with hate, reached for Hannah. But this time, she did not flinch. She did not shrink. She stepped forward and, with a sudden explosive strength born of every night spent freezing in the snow, every tear swallowed in silence, she shoved him back. Daniel staggered off balance, his boots slipping on the icy ground. He caught himself against the porch post, blinking in stunned confusion. Hannah stood tall before him, the fire of life burning bright in her eyes. "You lost your chance," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the cold like a blade. "The night you chose the cold over your family." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the coming snow. For a moment, Daniel looked small, almost pitiful, shrinking under the weight of his own guilt. But Hannah no longer saw a man worth pity, only the ruin he had chosen for himself. She turned away without another word, leaving him to drown in the wreckage he had made, while Eli followed in silent protection, a shield at her back. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Hannah felt the ground firm beneath her feet. Daniel's screams faded into the howling wind behind them, swallowed by the vastness of the empty plains. Hannah did not look back. She didn't need to. Some ghosts, once banished, had no power anymore. As they rode, the land stretched out before them, a raw, open promise stitched together by winter-browned grasses, sleeping rivers, and mountains dusted with snow. The horizon, endless and wild, welcomed them not with fanfare, but with silence. The kind of silence that asked nothing and demanded nothing in return. The settlers along the trail saw Daniel's disgrace written plain on his face. The staggering gait, the bruises of his own making, the twisted mouth that could find no one left to curse but the empty sky. And they turned their backs, not out of pity, but out of the quiet understanding that a man who abandoned his own blood to the wolves had no place among those who fought tooth and nail to survive together. Hannah and Eli returned to the Cheyenne village, where wary eyes watched their approach. She could feel the tension in the way the villagers shifted, how they paused their work to study her with silent calculation. A white woman here, in their midst, in a time when trust had long been bled from the earth. But Eli's presence at her side, unshaken, solid as granite, softened their gazes. The first to approach was an elder with hair the color of bone and eyes that saw deeper than sight. He touched Hannah's hand briefly, not in greeting, but in acknowledgement. Not Cheyenne, not enemy, simply survivor. In the days that followed, life was not easy, but it was life. Eli, with his calloused hands and endless patience, set about building her a new home. A lodge of thick hides and sturdy poles, placed close to his own, but not too close, allowing her the dignity of choosing her path. He worked in silence, as he always did, letting the steady rhythm of labor fill the spaces that once might have been claimed by grief. The winter was hard. Food was scarce. Some nights the cold found its way into the seams of the tent and gnawed at their bones. But Hannah endured, and when the first soft breezes of spring whispered across the plains, she knew she had planted her roots deeper than she ever had before. And then, one clear morning under a sky so wide it seemed almost merciful, Hannah's child was born. The boy came screaming into the world, fists clenched, lungs full of fierce, defiant life. The villagers gathered, drawn by the ancient pull of new breath among them. They brought small gifts, bundles of sage, beads, tiny moccasins stitched with care. Their smiles were cautious, but real. Life, after all, belonged to everyone. Hannah cradled her son to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. His skin was warm against her. His heartbeat was steady, insistent, a drum calling her forward into a future she had once thought stolen. She named him Thomas, not after her bloodline, nor Daniel, nor the life she had left behind, but after the son Eli had lost, the child whose spirit, she believed, had guided her through the storm, whispering strength into her shattered bones. Eli said nothing when she told him. He simply sat by her side, staring into the fire with eyes that shone just a little too brightly, the faintest tremor in his shoulders. In the great hush that followed, as dusk bled gently into night, a new life began. Not with the roar of vengeance or the clang of conquest, but with the soft, steady beating of two hearts learning how to hope again. The seasons turned in their slow, relentless dance, brushing old scars with new life. Winter's claw gave way to spring's tender breath. Summer gilded the grass with gold. Autumn laid a quilt of flame over the hills before yielding once again to the patient hunger of frost. Through it all, Hannah, Eli, and little Thomas lived. Not merely survived, but lived. Their days were stitched together with the rough, enduring thread of work and quiet joy. Mornings spent gathering herbs in the meadows, afternoons chasing the boys' laughter through the tall prairie grass, evenings sitting by the fire, speaking little, letting the simple comfort of presence say what words could not. There were stares at first, even among the Cheyenne. A white woman and an Indian warrior raising a child born of betrayal and endurance. There were those who whispered that such a thing could never last, that it defied the natural order of a world carved by old wounds. But time wore down suspicion the way river water smooths a jagged stone. Eli's strength was in his constancy, the way he taught the village boys to track deer with silent patience, the way he sat vigil at sickbeds long after stronger men had turned away, the way he stood between danger and those who could not stand for themselves. Hannah's strength was quieter, but no less fierce. The way she coaxed gardens from stubborn soil, the way she wove cloth with fingers once stiff from frostbite, the way she smiled even when her heart ached for the faces she would never see again. Together, they became a testament to something the land itself seemed to have forgotten: hope. Not the reckless hope of children, but the hard-earned kind, battered and tempered by loss. Their wedding was not a grand affair. No bells rang out. No priest in starched vestments recited verses. Instead, they stood beneath the whispering pines on a hill overlooking the village, the needles hissing secrets to the wind. An elder spoke blessings in the Cheyenne tongue. Eli placed a simple beaded necklace around Hannah's throat. She tied a strip of white cloth, salvaged from the hem of her old wedding dress, around his wrist. No vows were needed. Their survival was vow enough. Thomas toddled at their feet, clutching a feather in one small hand, laughing without understanding that the world, for once, had chosen mercy over cruelty. Word of their union spread beyond the village, carried on traders' tongues and wanderers' songs. Some called it a scandal, others a miracle. But for those who had seen too much blood soak the soil, too many futures burned to ash, the sight of them, a family stitched from broken pieces, became a quiet kind of prayer. A reminder that even in a land ruled by hatred, there could still be spaces carved out for healing, that broken things, when mended with enough care, could be stronger than they had ever been whole. Beneath the wide, merciless skies of the frontier, Hannah, Eli, and Thomas built a life not from what they had lost, but from what they had found in each other. And in doing so, they planted something deeper than roots. They planted a future.